I'm Claire Edwards, and you're listening to Authentic Leadership, a series of conversations, insights, and inspirations with leaders who are real, raw, and authentic. Today I'm bringing you a conversation about self-leadership, which I'm sure you would agree is the first pillar of leadership. How we show up when things are difficult, how we manage our emotions and our ability to pick ourselves up and keep moving forwards says everything about us as a leader. Today, I'm in conversation with Shelagh Brennand, who, in my eyes, is the courageous leader. Shelagh shares her story from her time with the police in the UK to a life-changing event a few years ago in Australia. In this episode, Shelagh shares many golden nuggets for living a courageous life. Enjoy. Like other podcast guests, Shelagh Brennand and I don't know each other. We met on LinkedIn when Shelagh started liking and commenting on my posts, and I became curious about her journey, both career-wise and through life. So I invited Shelagh to be in conversation with me for the podcast, and under the banner of The Courageous Leader. Now, Shelagh grew up in the UK, you'll hear that from her thick Yorkshire accent, and had a 25-year career in the police force before moving to Australia in 2008, where she became a private investigator. Then Shelagh experienced a life-changing event, which we'll explore later in the podcast. I'm really looking forward to Shelagh's story unfolding and would encourage you not to read the show notes until after you've listened. Shelagh, welcome to Authentic Leadership.
Well, good morning, Claire, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Shelagh, listen, I've asked you to be part of the Authentic Leadership podcast under the banner of The Courageous Leader. And I'd like to start by going back to your career in the police in the UK and maybe share with me some examples of, courage that you saw in others and ultimately how the experience of being in the police helped your own courage grow.
Oh, yeah, and that takes me back now. I've been retired a few years. I think joining at the age of 19, I felt, grown up as you do at 19, but perhaps very naive. And a lot of people when I joined the police were older than me. And I was trying to, when you say think about being courageous, I think throughout all your career, police officers are quite courageous because you never know what you're going to meet. But I do remember one particular episode not long out of my probation when I was called. I was on foot beat as it was then in uniform. I was called to a report of a man who was in flames. I know that's quite shocking. I know. And I ran down this lane behind a farm yard and I was greeted with a man who was black like a piece of burnt timber, probably, to describe it, with his foot still on fire, and I put his foot out. I know. I hope this isn't too shocking for your listeners, but it's just something that will probably lead into what I'm going to say about being courageous.
Yeah,
and
no, please carry on.
Talking to him, and he said to me, quite strangely, "Oh, my wife's going to kill me." And what he'd done is it had transpired he had financial issues. He'd sorted out all his finances, but he was in dire straits. I think he'd remortgaged, and the only way out, he felt, was to actually set himself on fire and kill himself. So on the way to hospital, he was still alive, but sadly he died before he got to hospital because his burns were so severe, and I could not stop crying. That's the first, other than my nan who died naturally, in her 80s, that was the first person I'd seen die like that, and I could not get over it. And what I found strength from and courage from probably was my colleagues. Now, I'm not saying they made a joke of it, but they all went back and they all cooked up the breakfast as you would normally, and I couldn't eat, I couldn't do anything, and it quite affected me. And then as the weeks, the months went on and you went to other deaths and you tended to become more courageous because of that. And I said to people, how do you find not just the courage, but the professionalism and to deal with something without getting upset? And you say you just learn to live with it. And it's very, very true. Because as I went into CID later in my career, I dealt with a lot of horrific things. And I'm not saying it's sad, but you do just deal with it. You just put on that professional face and think, right, I'll get on with this. This is what I joined the police for, But that always sticks with me. Not how I dealt with it, but how could somebody feel that was their only way out in life, And I think that was very sad.
And I suppose then, in early on in your career, I'm curious, what sort of training, support and counselling was available to you when you first started experiencing, traumatic events?
Good question. There's certainly a lot. I mean, I joined in 1982, so that's quite a few years ago. And what's available now is far more than was then. And I'm sure we all, as yourself, Claire, hear of police officers committing suicide. Certainly here in Australia, PTSD from the police and other similar forces. There was a forced doctor you could go see if you felt traumatized or you felt, some way affected by something. But certainly the availability now is far greater than it was, which is such a bonus. But I would say I probably found support through my colleagues, and subsequently when I met my husband some years later, he was a huge support to me. He's not a policeman, but he was marvellous, and I could come home and debrief over a G&T or a cup of coffee, whatever, and then I feel it's out of my system. But we tended to support each other and talk to other colleagues. So there was a very good support network within your colleagues. And I think that's probably the same, I'd like to think, in business and other places I've worked and who I've worked with, that you tend to lean off each other.
That's a really good point. And the work that I do in resilience is a lot of it is around the foundation of resilience is building a support network and maintaining a support network, because sometimes when things get too difficult, we can withdraw, and that's can be the rocky road to ruin. So I encourage people to say, if you notice yourself withdrawing because maybe you think people aren't going to be interested in being with you because you're feeling down, then really that's a red flag. And you've got to get back into community. And just listening to your story there, it sounds like that you put, in a way, strategies into place around boundaries and also around humor. And I'm curious as to how did you use humor as a coping mechanism?
You've hit the nail on the head. I've got to be politically correct to a point, or do I?
No, Sheila, this is called authentic. It's real, raw and authentic. You don't need to be politically correct at all.
Oh, have you ever seen, I don't know if you've ever seen Life on Mars? It's a TV program. I don't think it's currently on the TV, and it's about a detective inspector in Manchester, which is another northern force. Are they South Yorkshire, Manchester? Can't remember.
No, to the side, Lancashire.
To the side, Lancashire, silly me. God, forgot already. And basically something happens. He has an accident, bumps his head, and he goes back to the police as they were in the 60s, 70s. Forget which it is. And it's quite hilarious, actually, because you think back to when I joined, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, when I joined, there were, what you have now is, certainly in England, I'm not sure in Australia, it's the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984, which was introduced then. But before then was called Judge's Rules, and I could arrest somebody and go off shift at 10 o'clock at night and say, oh, Sarge, I'll just come back and interview him in the morning when I come back on. There were no real rules around detention. It was bizarre. And there were no tape recorded interviews, and you had an interview and you made notes, and then you made your pocketbook up afterwards and things like that. So the rules are very, very different. And now I'm doing what I'm doing, and I've actually forgot your question. Humour. I think it's very common. When I joined the police, and certainly when I joined the CID, I'd only got 5 years service, so that was quite rare, and it was quite rare for a woman at that point in the mid-80s to be in CID, but it's something I really loved. I loved criminal investigation, and I knew that's where my career would take me. I found it very interesting. So I'm a woman in a sea of men. So the jokes, the banter, banter at the time, you either stuck with it or you were out. And I think that's fair comment, you know, and I'm not proud to say this, and certainly of the force, and it's changed, but I remember when I was in my probation, which is like your first 6 months of probation, and part of your initiation was I got thrown in a cell. I had my police tights pulled down and my backside stamped with a station stamp by a female, I have to say. And I got stuck in the cell for an hour, and then if you didn't shout and bawl and came out and had a laugh about it, then, you know, you're one of them. And that's honestly how it was.
Wow.
So you think, I know, and that now, and obviously in my later career I worked in the professional standards department, and now, well, that's indecent assault, nothing less than, really. I've had colleagues who've had their ankles dangled out of the window, you know, held and dangled out of the window, and all sorts of things like that, really, setups and all sorts of stuff. It's like, yeah, you know, welcome to the ship. But that's the way it was. And as times changed, probably correctly, then things weren't acceptable. But we did get through it with humour, without a doubt. You know, we got through the sadness with humour, we got through the horrible things with humour. Yes, it might have been near the knuckle, but that really helped, because if you couldn't cope with the sad, the bad, you know, the ugly, then you couldn't do your job.
Wow. Yeah, what a great story. And
yes, I mean,
no, I wasn't expecting that at all, which is why I love these podcasts and the different flows that they take. And looking back on that, you can see the intention behind it. It's like, you know, you're going to have tough times ahead. So if you can't cope with this, you know, politically correct or not, then you might struggle. So yeah, I get the point of the initiation. I wonder what they do these days. I'm sure
nothing. Absolutely nothing. I remember reading, not so many years ago, about a force in London who allegedly set somebody up, a whole shift, set a new probationer up, and I'm sure it was London, and wherever they were armed, it was an armed unit, and a new guy came and they pretended that there was this burglary. He was first on the scene, and then they came in with faces covered, guns out, saying strip. They got into strip, firearms out, and then it's like, oh, ha ha, welcome to the team. Well,
oh my
gladly,
goodness.
This officer thought, I'm sorry, that's not on. And the whole team was sacked. The whole team was sacked. You know, I mean, there's talking about a little bit of fun over something so criminal, aren't we? So gladly,
and potentially
that's
traumatic.
Not acceptable and shouldn't be. But when I moved into professional standards department later in my career, some of the things I investigated, I did feel, really? Oh, come on, get over it. You know, and I did feel a bit like that, because, you know, if me and you, Claire, are talking and we are talking about something close to somebody else and they may get offended by what we're talking about, then they can make a complaint. And that's how near it is. And I accept in some situations, you know, things are acceptable. So you've got to watch what you're saying. But I know colleagues who are in different forces in England and Wales and Scotland now, and I know that the job's not the same. You know, it's all come to work, go home, and you spend so much of your life at work that you need to have that, not, you know, fun. You need to have that light-heartedness somewhere in amongst your working day to get you through it.
And I think, you know, and that brings us on nicely in time. I think for you that was, you know, it was a vocation to be part of the police and to be in CID. And then in 2008, you made a family decision to up sticks and move to Australia. So, you know, it's a big change. How did that sort of impact your career decisions?
Yeah, good question. When I met David, I was a uniformed sergeant, and then I became detective sergeant, and then I went through the CID, And my last few years was as a detective inspector in professional standards, dealing with complaints against police. So just before I moved into that department, David and I came on holiday here when Patrick was little. My son, who's 18 now, over in Australia. David used to live here as a child himself and always wanted to move back. So we came as a bit of a holiday when Patrick was about 18 months old. And when we moved back to England after the holiday, David said, do you think you can move out? And I said, no, I think it's just too far. He went, oh, you have to go. But I think when I put it all into perspective, my family were all in England. I'd got a good career. I would be going for the next rank for chief inspector. That's where I could see myself going. But then as my years in professional standards moved on, I was just getting burnt out. I felt, I was 24/7 a lot of the time. We were on call, and we used to get called out if any member of the public was in the custody of police and something happened. So whether that was a police chase, an injury in custody, or anything, or injury upon arrest, anything like that.
Yeah.
So we used to have to get called out through the night. So I was getting really busy. Patrick was growing up, and I was finding that I'm not really going to see much of this little boy that I want to see. And I said to David, as for us, most decisions are made over a glass of wine one evening. And I said to David, I think we should look again at going to Australia. And he went, really? I went, yeah. I said, I don't think I can do my 30 years. I don't think I can keep going at this level and this pace without burning out, not being a family as we want to be. So that was really the root cause, and that's why we decided we'd come out here. And my husband has the business there, a fibre optic business, so he submitted the application for a state-sponsored business visa, and we decided to come to Queensland. And so I decided I would do my 25 years. So I did that and retired, the month that we moved out in June 2008.
And then what did you do?
Well, I was going to be, as they say in Yorkshire, a ladies what do lunch type of girl. And and that was it. I would retire. I helped set David's business up. So for the first 7 months or so, I was busy with David, and then I started walking, and beautiful over here in Queensland. And I thought, no, I can't do. I'm not a coffee morning every day sort of girl, and I've maybe grown into that in the latter year, but I decided I needed to do something. So David said, well, why don't you just get a private investigator's license? And I said, how on earth do I do that? What skills have I got? He said, what skills have you got?
Oh, you've got fantastic transferable skills.
I know, but at the time, I thought, well, I've only been at police officers. Like, yeah, wake up. So I submitted I know it's funny, isn't it? You just think, who's going to want me? And then I submitted what's called a recognition of prior learning. I didn't need to do the course, which was very basic. So people can do a course and then, hello, here, I'm a private investigator, which I think, like any job or thing in life, I believe life experience is crucial to do any job nowadays. So that's what happened. I got my PI license, and I sent a CV around, and a company in Brisbane said, oh, would you like to come and do some subcontract work for us? So that's what I started doing. And we live on the Sunshine Coast, so every now and then I'd go into Brisbane, and I dealt with a lot of their corporate clients on a subcontract basis, sometimes working with colleagues from the firm, sometimes given the job just to do with myself. But I did a lot of bullying in the workplace, similar stuff to what I'd been doing in the police. And then they decided that with budgets, as time went on, the jobs they were getting were less and less from the corporate clients, because corporates were trying to deal with their own in-house things. And I did work for a company for a short time, but that wasn't flexible enough for Patrick's school. And then I just started doing insurance work latterly, where, fully enough, for the same company, they were taking on some insurance work, things like burglary claims, stolen vehicles, motor vehicle accidents, just helping insurance company, investigate those impartially. So that worked well because I fit in with Patrick's school, you know, and I can do things, you know, any day of the week. So that's what I was doing latterly.
So here you are, you've moved over to the Sunshine Coast, you're settled, you've got a new career going, and then in 2013 you experienced, I think, what can only be called a life-changing event. Can you share with our listeners what happened then?
Yes, I'd love to, and this wasn't in the plan.
No, it certainly wasn't.
I know. I was probably the fittest I'd ever been. I was still doing a lot of walking. Been out the night before with some friends at their house, and the following day, the last day of the school holidays, Easter, Patrick and I were tidying up the garden at the house we were living at then. David, by this point, had actually gone to work away on the pipeline, using his skills there because work on the coast was a bit short. So he had a 5-4 job, fly-in, fly-out job, which was fine. So I thought, right, I will mow the grass. I never mowed the grass, and I've never mowed it since, but I'll mow the grass, we'll do some gardening, ready for David coming home so he doesn't have to do it. Looking forward to him coming home. And it was a hot day. I'd drunk what I thought was enough. I'd eaten what I thought was enough. And Patrick, after a couple of hours, went inside because it was hot and he was only 11. I mean, I did well to get 2 hours out of him. And then I remember speaking to David, and how does this strimmer work? And he went, oh, forget that, Sheila, it sounds too hot. Anyway, I decided, you know, I better go inside. I really felt hot then. I'll get a drink of water. So I shouted to Patrick to get a drink of water. Mate, come and get me a drink of water. I just feel a bit hot. And I suddenly felt very nauseous. I felt dizzy. I thought I was going to pass out or be sick, you know, that sort of feeling. And just thought I was a bit dehydrated. I put my head into the toilet, as one does, to think I'm really going to be sick.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I remember. Knelt down on the floor, head into the toilet, last thing I remember. And when I came round, which I believe was only a few minutes later, Patrick was evidently, I don't remember this, stood in front of me with a glass of water. I was slumped on the floor. I couldn't get off the floor. The whole of my right side wouldn't move. It was totally numb. And I tried to, my mouth moved, but no words came and I couldn't speak.
Oh,
I initially thought, I initially thought I'd fainted. It's now I can tell that story without crying.
Yeah.
But it still brings back the look on Patrick's face that I'll have with me. Now I'm crying. It's funny, isn't it, after all these years?
No, it's human.
You know, he looked so... And then I came round, I remember him with the water, and then I remember his face looking so scared. And typical control freak I am, evidently I was trying to, with my left hand, I think I was trying to put words on the floor for him what to do. I don't know. He didn't automatically ring the ambulance. So I just thought I'd fainted. I really just thought I'd fainted. But because I couldn't speak and because I couldn't move, I thought, oh God, I wonder if I've had a stroke. But I couldn't tell that to Patrick.
Yes.
My mum had a stroke when she was 50, but it was a much more serious stroke. But I was aware of some of the signs, and all I could think of, oh my God, I don't want to be like my mum, you know. And anyway, in summary, my friend called quite unexpectedly, came up the drive, and Patrick said, quick, this is related to me. Something's happened to Mum, I don't know what's happened. And between them, and my friend actually came over for a visit the other day from New Zealand, and we were laughing about it because we can now, and neither
to that humour,
remember the emergency number, because Patrick thought it was still 999, which is Britain, and Erin's was 111, I think New Zealand's 111, and they were thinking, well, is it 911 or what is it? You know, so at the time they were saying, well, I don't know what it is, and they clearly found out what it was. You know, when they, got over there, what's the number, and phoned the ambulance, and the ambulance came, and I was stretched into the ambulance, and I remember my friend Erin ringing David. I remember being on the phone and then saying, look, just be aware that a mum had a stroke, and they were talking to me about stroke. I'm thinking, oh God, no, it can't be a stroke. And all I could think of was, I don't ever like my mum, because my mum's still permanently disabled now from, she's 33 years ago. So yeah, so I'd suffered a stroke, you know.
Wow.
Doing something fit as a fiddle, eating healthily, couldn't be fitter. Just that day, having done too much in the sun, putting my head down. And what happened was, subsequent, obviously went to hospital, had the scans, and blood had burst through what's called your basilar artery in the back of my neck, and then gone into my brain. Believed it had clotted at some point, and then just dispersed. So from a level of, you know, mild to very serious stroke, I had a milder stroke, but I can tell you, anybody who has a stroke, it's life-changing no matter what it is.
Oh, it
but
must
I'm
be.
Lucky, and I'm luckier than most. So, yeah, so that's what happened to me, and that's 6.5 years ago now.
Gosh. Yeah. And something unusual happened, didn't it, when you regained your speech?
It did. A bit too soon, my husband always said. I talked too soon. After he thought, you know, can you not do anything about it? So, as you know already, from just a couple of conversations, I'm a bit of a chatterbox. And yeah, it did. Within probably days, really, although I didn't initially pen stuff for a few weeks, but my brain would only work in rhyme. So they do say, I know, I've read a lot of books since then about the brain, and the brain is ever changing, and I'm fascinated, and we'll come on to my stroke work, I'm sure, but I'm fascinated how the brain can change itself. And what I really like is an analogy that a social worker of mine at the time gave me, is that the brain's full of cabinets. And when you have a stroke, sometimes, depending on the severity, all the cabinets change, all the cabinets close. And she said, over time, with therapy, repetition is a thing, that the cabinets will start to open. She said, but sometimes some cabinets will never open again. You know, like my maths cabinet, I can't count.
Okay.
And other little things. So, but she said, what you need to do is embrace the cabinets that have never ever opened and are now wide open. So
what a wonderful analogy.
I know, it is, isn't it?
Embrace the cabinets that have never ever opened and are now wide open.
Yep. So that was my poetry. So if you call it poetry, for the English viewers who know Pam Ayres, it's very like Pam Ayres, because it wasn't necessarily poetry at first, just everything had to rhyme. So, David used to giggle a bit like, you know, I can't get out of bed, you know, there's a pain in my head, you know, something as simple as that. But one of the very first poems I wrote was to the Stroke Foundation, and it was about the day of my stroke. And this rhyming was actually at first quite frustrating because I couldn't get to sleep. I'd be in the middle of the night and I'd wake up suddenly with, I need to write this down. And I remember penning a poem about my stroke. It's now, what me, I'm only 49. Not me, I'm only 49. And I sent it to a lady who'd already contacted me at the Stroke Foundation. And I said, oh, look, just thought in your mail this morning, you know, this is what I had in my head. You know, it sort of explains the day of my stroke quite well. Yeah. And she went, oh my goodness, Jill, that's fantastic. Can we put it in one of the Stroke Foundation newsletters? And then I started sharing poetry on Facebook, on some of the Facebook groups that I've been introduced to. There's lots of Facebook support groups around for stroke, and people said, oh, that's great, because that's how I feel, and that's what I feel about today, or I feel this, you know, but I can't explain it. But the way, I'm not going to explain it very well in the podcast, but how I portray my feelings within the poetry, because all the poems I wrote were about things that had happened to me or how I was feeling. Others were giving to the husbands, the loved ones, the colleagues, and just helping them understand. Because subsequently I got post-stroke depression and I couldn't get out of bed, and then I wrote some what I call darker poems. Some I don't really remember writing. There's sadness in them, but it's important to experience the sadness to then appreciate then where you're at now. And others couldn't tell people about the sadness, but they felt confident upon reading my poems that that's okay. Sheila's felt like that. And now look at what Sheila's doing. That's good. That means maybe I could do that. Or if I tell my husband, he'll understand how I feel. So it really made me move forward with my poetry, without a doubt.
Wow. Well, I'll make sure that we put a link to your poetry on the show notes. And
thanks.
So I mean, it would have been really easy for you just to basically retire from life, become one of those ladies what does lunch. But you didn't. You got involved with the Stroke Foundation, didn't you? Tell us more about that.
I did, and it wasn't at first. Like I said, within 3 months of my stroke, I'm very much, nothing's beating me. Sorry, I clapped my hands then. Nothing's beating me. I flew to England to see my nephew get married in the June, and my physician said, look, the detriment of you getting depression from not going could be worse, if you don't see it as an important family event. I was 50, had a party, and I think it was after that, after all the celebration had gone, we got our citizenship in that time. Suddenly I was faced with, okay, this is me. What can I do? My brain was a bit of a scramble. I wasn't sharp enough to return to the work that I'd done, and you need to be sharp to be an investigator. There's lots of analytical work in the information you're given, interview planning, and my brain just couldn't take that much information. It was bad enough getting up to think, right, well, what do I make for dinner? What do I need from the shops?
So some of your cabinet doors were still a bit squeaky.
Oh, very squeaky. I had to, one of my poems I wrote was about making muffins, about how I put the wrong ingredients in, and it's that sort of simple things, simple tasks that I couldn't do, and I couldn't do more than one a day. And I just thought, and that's why I got depression, and many do, and that's okay. But I didn't. It's sad when I say this, and obviously it's sad when I told David and Patrick this, but I said I need a purpose in my life. And David said to me, well, you're a wife, you're a mum, that's big. I said, but it's not enough. And to tell your family it's not enough being a mum and a wife. But it wasn't. I knew that I needed something, call it your passion, call it whatever. I needed something for me, something that I felt I could contribute and make a good job. I was a blooming good investigator.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that, but I couldn't move past that. So I cried it out, thinking I'm never going to be. And eventually my sister took me to the doctors. I got some medication, and it made me flat, and then made me a bit better. And then I started exercising. It was my beautiful trainer, Melinda, who said, just focus on what you can do. You're writing your poetry, you're exercising, carry on climbing some mountains and cycling, and keep writing your poetry. You should maybe publish a book. I went, oh yeah, whatever. And it's like, that's really what then moved me forward. But following that, the Stroke Foundation were contacting me because of the poetry and other things. And I thought, maybe I could do some voluntary work with them. And that's what happened. Because I'm good at speaking, or confident at speaking, I became a Stroke Safe ambassador. So I decided clearly to turn the bad into the good. And that involved speaking at either big corporate conferences with sponsors of the Stroke Foundation, or speaking at your 10, 15 strong women's knitting circles locally on the coast, and teaching people how to be stroke safe.
Anything to get your message out there.
Oh, without a doubt. Two messages, really. One, that it can happen to anybody at any age, any time, and people, when they see me and see me physically now, I'm 56, can't believe, the first thing they say is, well, you're so young to have one, and you're not. You're not at 49. You can have, babies can have strokes in utero. It's that common. But also to show that, I did have a life-changing event. And as much as I can be a leader with the Stroke Foundation, a leader on the coast here in stroke, I can also be a promoter of your life, really, and say no matter what you have in your life, if you're physically able, you can get better, because the support there for you in so many shapes and forms. The thing you have to do is just reach out for it and find it.
Such a good message, Sheila. And, you know, what you're saying, it holds true for all of us in terms of don't focus on what you can't do, focus on what you can do. And I'm curious, is that, you know, with all your experience from the police and the CID and you know, witnessing trauma, was there anything that you drew upon from your career to help you build the courage to move forward after your stroke?
I think it's going back to the very first question that you asked about the man who set himself on fire. And I thought at the time, I never thought, how could he be in that headspace to be so sad, to think that something so bad it has to take his own life. I thought, I can't ever imagine being in that space. And then being in that space myself, where I don't think I ever consciously wanted to do away with my life. I didn't like the life I had, and I wrote about it, but I don't remember thinking of ways to take my own life. But then hearing people who have taken their own life makes me so sad. And I'm involved with Stories of Hope on the Coast, which is, you know, Kerry's a counsellor, and she does a lot of suicide prevention, and it's so prevalent at the moment.
Yes.
And I think going from that to experiencing it, you can actually say to people, I know how you feel. I really know how you feel. So I think people say, well, you've never been through this, or you've never been through that. And having been in those dark places and then, you know, coming back around, and don't get me wrong, you know, I do like to give a positive outlook constantly, but, you know, we all still have off days where, you know, I'm too fatigued because I do too much. But I just think leaning on, you know, my skills as a police officer and being able to talk to people.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm a chatterbox, being able to listen, I think that's half the battle. I can't help everybody. I can't help the world. And I've soon come to learn that, because to my own detriment, because I can't help even all of my friends who are going through the bad times, because I haven't got the cognitive capacity to take it all. Yeah. And maybe I do take a step back a little sometimes, because it blows me away, and I get very fatigued. And since I've lessened my work with the Stroke Foundation since, you know, the last month or so, doing things like this is great, because I can still get the message out without me physically going out, standing, preparing, you know, and that tires me out the most. My brain tires me out, and I've realised this by stepping back these last couple of months. Physically, I'm great, but mentally my brain is still tired, and I can't do too much. And that was the hardest thing, perhaps, giving up what I love to do. But I know I have to look after my health, because if I don't, I'm not there for me or my family. So you have to put priorities in. But certainly being a leader, I think throughout my career, and being a leader in stroke, I can still be a leader without physically standing up there and talking to people. I think that's where I feel in other ways, you know, finding you finding me on LinkedIn, and keeping my Facebook page going, and doing things in the background with the Stroke Foundation is still really important. It's
critical. And you know, and the first principle of leadership is self-leadership. And it's good to hear that you didn't go from one situation to another where you could have just completely burned out in the work that you were doing for the Stroke Foundation, that you've acknowledged that self-care is essential too.
And I love being asked to speak about me and my life story as a motivational speaker, and launching myself as such a couple of years ago was great. But in all honesty, I haven't got the brain space to market myself enough. And that's okay, because then, you know, the commitments come in, and I just, as much as that's what I love to do, I really do, I have to each day think, no, Sheila, you know, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Think about a pocket of your life that you've now done, and what you've given, and you can still give in other ways.
Yeah.
I still do lots of other volunteering work for other things, and I feel that, you know, people still ring me now from years ago. People still know that I've got a passion and a knowledge of stroke, and it's the knowledge base that's good as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel you're right in what you say, Claire, that you cannot be good for others unless you're healthy and good yourself.
Yeah.
You just can't.
And you know, and the whole cognitive capacity is on a continuum, and stroke or no stroke, it's important for us to know when we're cognitively struggling and burnt out. And I think that's we've still got a way to go in that, in my own experience of working with leaders who just push through and push through and push through, and then you know, end up with a quality of life that's been extremely constricted or compromised. Oh, Sheila, it's so good talking to you. We're probably coming up shortly to our time, and I just wondered if, you know, if there were one or two messages that you could get out there to other people who, like you, have had some form of brain-related injury, that they might be in that dark place or struggling with their motivation. What's a message that you'd have for them?
I say this quite often, but just to put it into context, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, actually has Lyme disease, and she's absolutely amazing. But, you know, going back a few years ago, she was, you know, unable to get out of bed through the pain and the illness, and she's just helped herself, really, because it's not recognised. I don't know if you know here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, actually, for those listeners who are outside of Australia, if we can give them just a quick description of what Lyme disease is. Is it mosquito-borne?
Yes, and it basically just attacks your autoimmune system. It's big. And this is my knowledge of it. So if there's anybody listening and I've got this wrong, I apologise. But this is my knowledge from remembering what my friend has said. And basically, it can present itself in your body by other things. For instance, like arthritis. You can have severe arthritis, but it can just be then diagnosed as arthritis. But my friend said at one point, she could not move her body, and she felt this incessant itching inside, like her skin was just on fire. And to see her now, she's a beautiful friend. I've only known her a couple of years, true stories of hope. But she said to me the other day, she said, people post a lot about, and I'm carrying on a bit longer than expected, but she said,
no, please. We want to hear you. You're a fabulous storyteller. Please take all the time you want to share your story.
I post a lot about being positive, focusing on what you can do, go out there every day, be happy, just do something that makes you happy. And she said to me, it's okay saying that, she said, but I've got a friend now who's really struggling with Lyme's, and she cannot get out of bed. She's desperate to get out of bed, but she can't physically get out of bed. And sometimes, and it's not through my intention, but I have to remember that all my limbs work, and I can climb, I can run. I've done a run this morning, as you know, with my friend. And I believe that when I say this, I believe that even if you're ill, I appreciate that, seek support from somebody who can help you get to that stage. So, and I'm not meaning if you're tied to your bed, if you're genuinely ill and you can't move, yes, go out and sit in time with nature, because I believe nature for me is very grounding, whether it's going for a walk in the forest or a swim in the ocean. I love both, but for me, it's seeking support first and foremost, because you're not the only person who's ever been there, and you cannot do it alone. No matter what you think, there's people there, but you have to be the one to reach out. And I don't necessarily mean medical. There's many holistic ways of dealing with things, and friends, family, support networks. So reaching out for support first and foremost. We mentioned it earlier, focusing on what you can do. Yes, you might not be able to use your legs, but maybe you can use your arms. You can do something. And I've talked to people who are severely disabled, and they still understand where I'm coming from, if that makes sense. And just move on. at some point you have to accept that your old life, as I call it, you're not going to get back to that as much as you want to. And until you make that transition from accepting, and it's a grieving process. It's like you've lost the person you were. You've lost the brain, the physical person you were, whichever. And that's hard. And that takes people many a long time, some people never. But until you get through that grieving process, you're never going to be able to move on, with the next stage of your life. And I believe certainly just be happy with what you've got. I believe we're all striving for better things, the bigger house, the bigger car, let's do this, let's work every hour we want, and then, in retirement this, in retirement that, and hopefully next year or the year after, my husband and I are selling up and we're going travelling once Patrick's in university, because I've lost too many colleagues this last year from the police force who've retired, 55, 56, within a year they've just dropped dead, heart attack, gone. Yeah. And I believe, do it now, don't wait. If you can do it. And my son Gladly is beautiful, and he said, look, Mum and Dad, I'll be in uni, you just do what you want to do. He's very laid back, but we have to look after ourselves because we only get one life.
Absolutely. And I think, there's just listening to you there is, we don't want a stroke or a heart attack or an onset of diabetes to help us get that perspective in life. And I think one of the other aspects that we haven't talked about, but you've shown in your conversation, is around gratitude, about being present and looking at what you have got and being grateful for that.
And I believe I've done challenges over the years, and one year I every day posted for 365 days a photograph and something I was grateful for in my days. Sometimes we have those days where it's like, oh,
you got to look hard.
But and I'm involved with something called Roses, the people who live on the street and really don't have much in their life, and I'm involved in a sandwich rota. I help out at some events, and sometimes simply having a roof over our head or food on the table, we take for granted, And coming up to Christmas, I was talking to friends the other day, and they said, no, my child they're getting 3 presents. We're too commercial, I think, and I think it's not about gifts and that, it's about presence.
With a C.
With a C. And I believe, and this year, myself, my sister and others have decided, forget presents, let's just meet up more, let's go to the beach more, or let's have our time, because that in itself is worth $1 million, isn't it?
Oh, what a wonderful message to round our conversation on. Particularly, we're in December. I'm hoping to publish this podcast this month, and I think it's a very timely reminder to us all. Sheila, to me, you're an inspiration and one of the most courageous women I've never met. And I hope to change that. I'll be coming up to the Sunshine Coast at Christmas, and let's go and have a cuppa.
Sure, I would love to. And I know that it's not publicity on here at all, and I'm grateful for that as well. But if anybody wants any more information about stroke and feeling well, the signs of stroke, which I promote, and really getting your blood pressure checked and all the things to prevent a stroke happening, then please, we can prevent 80% of strokes just by life changes. So it's so important.
Where do people head to for that?
Right, well, the Stroke Foundation, so www.strokefoundation.org.au. They have all the information. Obviously, my website's probably on the end of this, or my email, or I don't know what.
Yeah, I'll make sure. Are you okay that if people connect with you on LinkedIn, that I can put your LinkedIn
for sure? Details? I'd love that too. Yeah, because I'm still on there, and I'm still connecting and posting, and again how we found it. That's so lovely, because I would have thought initially we were worlds apart, but we're not. And
not
people in
all.
Business aren't. I was that person, and I'm not now. So Okay.
Sheila, thank you so much. Go well, stay well.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.